you are using food composition data, one of the first things that you need to check is the component identification, especially when you are using data from more than one food composition table, what is quite common when we are calculating nutrient intakes. So let's see why it is important and how should we do it. My name is Fernanda Grande and welcome to Food Composition Explained. A complete and unambiguous component description is fundamental for assuring not only high-quality food composition tables, but also appropriate nutrient intake estimations. We have already discussed it in another video about the importance of food matching approaches, considering both food and component identification. So in this video, we will discuss in more details what is a complete food identification and how the component identifiers created by FAO and INFOODS can be used for a precise component identification. But before we start, let's see some examples to understand the importance of the component identification. So for example, if we want to know how much vitamin A is there in papaya, we need to look for this information in food composition tables. So let's take the information available in some food composition tables. So in this slide, I extracted all the information related to vitamin A in papaya from 4 food composition tables from different countries. So from the USA, from India, Brazil, and West Africa. So I took the values related to the total vitamin A content, as we can see here, but also all the components related to total vitamin A, so the components that contribute to total vitamin A in papaya. We can see that the type of data vary a lot among the different food composition tables. So most food composition tables present at least 2 different definitions for vitamin A, as we can see here in the highlighted columns. Except for the food composition table from India that brings all the carotenoids that contribute to the total vitamin A in papaya, but does not bring any value for the total vitamin A content in this food. We can also see here that there are 3 different definitions for vitamin A in papaya, and we can see here that the food composition tables from Brazil and West Africa present the same definitions, while the food composition table from the US presents one definition that is similar to the ones presented by Brazil and West Africa, and present also in addition a different unit here. And when we look at the values, at the figures that are presented here, we can see that they vary a lot depending on the definition used. So in this case, the data users may be questioning themselves, which data should I use? And would it make a difference depending on the definition that I choose? And I can tell you that it can make a great difference in your estimations depending on the value that you choose. And to decide which value should you take, you need to consider the purpose of the estimations and which dietary reference intake you will compare the nutrient data with. But for sure, what you should never do is to mix the different definitions. So as you can see here, the values vary a lot. So if you are calculating nutrient intakes and then you take for one food a definition in a food composition table, and then you go for another food in a different food composition table and take another definition, you will be mixing the values, what can result in wrong nutrient intake estimations. In this article, Maltedo and colleagues calculated the adequacy ratio for vitamin A in 5 countries. They used 2 different vitamin A definitions and 3 different reference intake values. The calculations were based on household consumption and expenditure surveys. I will not go too much into details because we will have another video just to discuss the issues with vitamin A. But if you want, you can read the full article and I will leave the link available down here in the video description. So if we have a look here in the line showing the 100% adequacy ratio for the 5 different countries, we can see that our conclusions would vary a lot depending on the vitamin A definition and also the dietary reference intake that we use. So as we can see here, for these 3 countries, our conclusions would be quite different depending on the criteria adopted for the evaluations. Meaning that it is extremely important that we take into consideration the vitamin A definition used in the food composition table, since it will affect our estimations. And here we can see a second example for the fiber content in different foods. So here I'm bringing the fiber content in different foods into food composition tables. They are the last versions of food composition tables available in 2021 for Ethiopia and West Africa. In the first column here we can see the data from the Ethiopian food composition table, and here we can see the data from the West Africa food composition table. And as we can see here, the values comparing the 2 food composition tables are very different, and the West Africa food composition table has much higher values for fiber when we compare to Ethiopia. So it is extremely important that we check why this kind of difference happens when we are looking into different food composition tables, especially if we are using or if we are considering to use both food composition tables for our intake estimates. In both examples that I showed here for vitamin A and for dietary fiber, we can see the importance of checking the component identification before using the data from food composition tables. So now let's see what it is important to check regarding the component identification for using the data from food composition tables. So now we know that the correct component identification is essential for using food composition data. So when we talk about the component identification, we are talking about 2 main aspects in food composition. So the first one is the unit and denominator, and the second one is the component definition and the analytical method. So let's see these 2 important aspects that we need to check for all the components. So starting with the unit and denominator. When we talk about units, we are talking about the metric unit that is used to quantify the given component. So in food composition tables, they are usually gram, milligram, or microgram, and they should be standardized. So if we are taking data from 2 different food composition tables, for example, we need to be sure that the components are expressed using the same unit in both food composition tables, and if they are not, we need to standardize the units. While the denominator indicates in which amount of the foods the components can be found. So usually in food composition tables, the denominator is per 100 grams of edible portion on fresh weight basis. But in some cases, especially for liquids, the information can also be expressed per 100 ml of food. So it is important to check because in this case we need to use density information if the amount of food consumed was recorded in grams. So we always need to check units and denominators to be sure that we are not introducing mistakes in our estimations, and it's important that both unit and denominators are clear in food composition tables. They should be part of a good documentation of the data. And as I said, once we check the documentation and then we realize that these values are not the same in different food composition tables, we need to standardize. And it is possible to convert from different units to standardize the information. And we can use as a reference the FAO INFOODS guidelines for converting units, denominators, and expressions to make the appropriate conversions and standardization of our data. So I really recommend that you use this guideline to help you on this process. And I will also leave the link to access the complete guideline here in the video description. And the second aspect that we always need to check regarding the component identification is the component definition and analytical methods used. And regarding this part of the component identification, we can have two different situations depending on the component. So for some components, the common name of the component is already enough to an appropriate component identification. So for example, if we have calcium in a food composition table, we don't need any further definition to identify the component, meaning that the component name together with the unit and denominator is already enough for a complete component identification. But for some components, the common name is not enough. We need further definitions to have a complete component identification. So this is the case, for example, for vitamin C. We need the common name of the component, but we also need the definition of what is considered vitamin C in this food composition table, for example. And when we say the definition of the component, it can include the analytical method that was used to generate the value that is presented in the food composition table, but it can also include the calculation method and the expression of the component. So in the case of the vitamin C, we need to have the definition together with the common name. So for example, when we say if a food composition table is presenting total vitamin C, it means that they are presenting the vitamin C as the sum of ascorbic and the hydroascorbic acid. So this is the complete definition for vitamin C, for example. So we need, in addition to the common name, we need to know the analytical method that was used and how the value was calculated to be presented in the food composition table. So when we go to this second step of the component identification, we can have either components where the common name are enough and components where we need further definition. And we call these components that need further definition of problematic components because they can vary among the food composition tables. And these are the main problematic components that we can find in food composition tables. And as we can see, there are a lot, and especially for vitamins, we usually need, in addition to the common name of the component, we also need the component definition. So every time you want to use any of these components in your intake estimations, it is important that you consider the two main aspects of the component definition. So the units and denominators, and also the definition of the component regarding how the component was analyzed, meaning that we need to know the analytical method that was used, or the definition of the component and how it is calculated in the food composition table. So given the importance of a precise component identification, and also since it can be a difficult task for regular users of food composition data, the INFOODS have created the component identifiers, also called TAGNAMES. So the TAGNAMES are component identifiers created to precisely describe the components in a food composition table, meaning that they include all the aspects that should be considered when identifying a component. So the expression mode, the calculation method, the name, and the analytical method used are included in the TAGNAME definition. So that's why the component identifiers should be included in the documentation of food composition tables, since they allow for an unambiguous description of the components presented in the food composition table. The tag names are like codes or abbreviations that are created according to a specific naming system that allows to clearly define components using only a few characters. So it's quite easier for the users if they see that different food composition tables use the same tag name for the component. It means that the components are equivalent and can be directly used in the intake estimations. So here I'm bringing some examples of tag names. So for example, for magnesium, we have only one tag name available, meaning that only the common name, as I previously explained, is enough to define the component, just like the example that I gave for calcium. But when we go to dietary fiber, for example, we can see that many different tag names exist, meaning there are significant differences that affect the values that are presented in both food composition tables, and they cannot be combined directly. So these are the key principles that guide the elaboration of the tag names. So each time an analytical method, expression, or calculation method is generating significantly different values, a new tag name should be created for this specific component. So this is why data from different tag names cannot be directly compared or combined, making of the tag names a very useful way to clearly describe the components in a food composition table. So I really recommend you that every time that you use a food composition table, you should try to check if the tag names were used to describe the components. That will make much easier for you to check if the values are comparable among different food composition tables. But if the food composition table did not use the tag names for defining the components, I really recommend that before using the values, you should try to assign the tag names for all the components presented in the food composition table. And this is also a way to judge the quality of the information that is presented by a given food composition table. Because if the description of a certain component is not clear enough or not complete enough for you to assign the appropriate tag name, this means that you need to be careful when using this data, especially if it's for that problematic components that I have presented here. So if it's not possible to know which tag name should be assigned to a certain component, a lot of care should be taken before using the values, and maybe you will not be able to use the data from a food composition table where the component identification is not clear and complete. So this is the kind of exercise that I really recommend you to do when using data from different countries or from different food composition tables in your estimates. First, try to check if the tag names were assigned by the food composition table, but if not, you should do it, and then you can compare component by component if you can use the different food composition tables for your statistics. So for example, here I'm bringing some components, so protein, carbohydrate, fiber, fat, vitamin A and vitamin C, and I took two different food composition tables, two hypothetical food composition tables from two different countries here. And when I assign the tag names for these food composition tables, I can check which components are comparable or not. So we can see here that, for example, protein is comparable, but carbohydrate is not. Same for fiber. Fat is comparable, vitamin A are not comparable. We can see here that we have this tag name with the dash, and every time that we have the tag name with the dash at the end, it means that the component description is not clear. So we cannot assign a specific tag name for this component, so meaning that the quality of this component is much lower than this one where I have the complete definition. And also for vitamin C, we can see that they use different definitions, so they cannot be directly compared. So this is one of the exercises that needs to be done before using the data. So here, going back to our initial examples, we can see here taking the 4 different food composition tables for vitamin A in papaya and assigning the tag names. We can see that for each of these columns, the tag names are different, meaning that the definition of the vitamin A here is not the same. So if we want to use the data from these 4 food composition tables, we need to check if we can standardize the components or if we will need to choose the food composition tables that present only the same definitions for the components that we want to use in our estimations. And for the fiber example, we can go back here and we will see that the food composition table from Ethiopia has lower values than the food composition table from West Africa. And this is why. So the Ethiopian food composition table presents the crude fiber, and this is the tag name, while the West African food composition table presents the total dietary fiber. So in this case, we can see that the problem is related to the methodology that was used to analyze the components, and the crude fiber presented here in the Ethiopia should not be used. This is an obsolete method and it underestimates the dietary fiber content, as we can see here. So we should not use these values for dietary fiber from the Ethiopian food composition table. We should prefer food composition tables that bring the total dietary fiber values. So as you can see, the tag names are quite useful for a complete component description and should be used to identify all the components in a food composition table. So you can check all the tag names that are available in the INFOODS website. Under the standards and guidelines, you will find the part with all the available tag names here, and some you can access here online, and some new components you can also make the download of the Excel file. So I really recommend that you check all the tag names available for the components of interest before starting the nutrient intake estimations using food composition tables. And if you want to learn more about tag names, you can also go to the FAO INFOODS eLearn course in food composition data, and you can check the Unit 3, which covers the component identification. And in addition to the e-learning, you can also check the food composition study guide in the module 4B, which brings the component nomenclature, and in the volume 1 you have all the questions, and in volume 2 you have also the answers and some comments on the answers. So it's also a good way to learn more about the component identification and the tag names. Well, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope that you could learn more about the importance of component identification and how to use the tag names. And if you are interested in learning more about food composition, you can access the website Food Composition Explained, and I will leave the link here in the video description. And if you have questions or any topics that you would like me to cover, please leave here in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.